the Hudson Library and Historical Society's Through the Eyes of the Artist series presents art historian Felicia Zavarella Stadelman, speaking about Czech Art Nouveau artist Alphonse Mucha, whose early graphical artwork fascinated the world and can still be seen today as graphics on modern consumer products. Recorded at the Hudson Library's Flood Meeting Room on October 25, 2015.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Hudson Library. This afternoon continues our fall series of featured artists. If you are new to our program, we've been hosting Felicia's art program Through the Eyes of the Artist for about 2 years now. So we've had the pleasure of learning about a lot of different artists over the years. I would like to welcome back Felicia Zavarella Stadelman as she presents her series of artist biographical lectures Through the Eyes of the Artist. Today she's going to present on the artist known for his Art Nouveau style, Alphonse Mucha.
Thank you so much for skipping this beautiful sunny day to come and sit in a dark room, but I do appreciate it. Alphonse Mucha is a fascinating artist. If anyone is destined to become an artist, he said, and follows this career led by a mysterious and irresistible force, then it's me, meaning Alphonse Mucha. He always felt that he was predestined to do things in his life, and I'll explain that to you as I go through the presentation. He would say, I submit myself to the commands of this watchful, protective force which propels me through life as if I were sleepwalking, placing before my feet at decisive moments all of my stops to success. Alphonse Maria Mucha was born on July 24th, 1860 in Ivančić, which is a small town in the southern area of Moravia. There's two different pronunciations of that. I always switch back and forth, near Brno. And what is now the Czech Republic, it was part of the Austrian Empire. His surroundings here were not very cosmopolitan, for the area was in very many ways very traditional in comparison to the large cities like in Prague or Vienna, and very, very much behind the times. He was the son of a local court usher, and which was a post that was kind of at the lowest rungs of bourgeois respectability. Incidentally, the family residence was shared in the same building as the local jail. Now, his daily acquaintances with poverty and suffering was reinforced by the death of 3 of his 5 siblings to tuberculosis. His mother, who was his father's second wife, a former governess of the family, was deeply religious, and she led Alphonse on a pilgrimage at the age of 7 and taught him about his religious heritage. The church deeply impressed him. So at an early age, he was very much influenced by the traditional folklore in this small community, the Eastern religious traditions, and also Slav nationalism. And it was also a time then when he lived where there was this rise in the expression of ethnic culture and interests, especially traditional bohemian and Moravian folklore. And this environment that he grew up in and lived in helped him develop into the young Mucha, who was a boy of intense spirituality, which was to mark his character for the rest of his life. And he had this abiding commitment and devotion to Slav nationalism. Now, although they had very little money, the family was able to give all of their children the gift of education, hoping that they would live a decent life as civil servants. And if you've been here at any of my lectures, you know I love my baby pictures. When I got this one of Alphonse Mucha, it's amazing. He looks like an old man, and he's probably about, 4 years old, maybe 5 years old. He was recognized very early on as being a naturally gifted artist, and his stepmother encouraged his talent by tying a pencil around his neck with a ribbon and encouraged him to draw on any surface in the house, including the tables and furniture. He was born left-handed, but teachers taught him to use his right hand, as often happened when he started school, and for his entire life afterwards, he was ambidextrous. His right hand was most often used for drawing and delicate work, and he used his left hand for manual labor. Now, his mother wanted him to join the priesthood, and his father hoped he would just find some form of employment. But when he was 11, he entered the boys' choir at St. Peter's Church in Brno, and which was the capital of Moravia. Early on, Alphonse Mucha, the young Alphonse Mucha, demonstrated this incredible talent for music, and he spent 3 years as a choir boy in the cathedral choir, singing very often, and his teachers remarked about what an incredible voice he had. Considerable singing talent, at least until his voice broke. When his voice broke, his father found him a job as a clerk. Now, the young Mucha was a poor clerk, but he devoted his spare time to drawing, to designing stage sets for the local amateur theater, the productions where he participated in as an actor, as a producer, and as a set designer. Now, encouraged by one of his teachers, he applied to the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague, but he was turned down. He eventually came across a newspaper advertisement for a young scene painter at the Viennese firm who was a large supplier of stage equipment, and they were painters of theatrical scenery, backdrops, and curtains. And so he sent them a group of his drawings in hopes that they might hire him. He was accepted, and he leaves for Vienna in 1879. Now, Vienna suited him well. Its most famous artist was Hans Markert, who deeply impressed the young Alphonse Mucha. Markert celebrated Vienna in his paintings, setting the real people that he saw around him in reconstructed historical events on canvas. And for the Emperor's Jubilee celebrations, Markert would bring these paintings to life, organizing elaborate pageants, historical events set on floats, a processional of men and women represented in historical and symbolic characters, colorful costumes that were right out of his paintings. So he would bring his paintings to life. Now, Mucha absorbed and was very much influenced by Markert's innovation. The central positioning, incidentally, of most of Markert's work was beautiful women in historical reconstructions, and he wanted to be a painter of history. Now, in December of 1881, Vienna's great Ring Theater burnt down, and over 500 people, incidentally, died in that fire. And the Ring Theater was one of his main employers because the clients for the theater production company that he worked for worked primarily for the Ring Theater. So the most recently hired staff was all fired. Now, Mucha said that I was certain that fate had something good in store for me, so he stayed in Vienna until almost all of his money was used up. And then he arbitrarily chose a railroad station and a destination on the basis of the money that he had left. Wouldn't that be amazing if we could just rely on our gut instinct to say, you know, this is the train ticket that I can afford, that's where I'm going. So he finds himself in Mukhalov. Now, Mukhalov had a hotel to which he moved, and there was a restaurant there that would allow you to have a tab, which was the draw of living here, because he didn't have any money, so he needed somewhere to work and to live, where he could put his meals and everything on a tab. The town also had a bookseller to whom he sold a number of drawings, and he built up a steady business of doing portraits of the pretty townspeople. These are some of the sketches and portraits that he did in Mukhalov. And there he decorated the local theater, he painted the scenery, he acted, he played the violin and guitar very often, and eventually he was invited to attend the local dances and do these portraits of the townspeople. Now, this is a backdrop incident, they called them theater panels then, that he did for one of the local productions in Mukhalov. Now, one of Mucha's new friends in Mukhalov was the manager of a large estate owned by a wealthy gentleman by the name of Count Kuhn. Now, Mucha designed an address replication of an address for the staff to present to Count Kuhn on his 60th birthday to give him a gift and to also show him what a great artist he was. And as a result, Count Kuhn invited Mucha to paint a series of frescoes for the dining room of a castle that he had just built. So he gets this great opportunity just doing an address sign. He quickly found out how to paint frescoes because he had never done that before, and then he moves into the castle from Count Kuhn's invitation and lives with him. Now, although he experienced some difficulty in the execution of these frescoes, he had no shortage of ideas, and this is one of the panels that was in the dining room of Count Kuhn's luxurious castle. Now, Mucha said, "I find that living in luxury is not overrated." And he made full use of the Count's extensive library. He studied many subjects while he lived there. And after he would finish the murals, he thought that Count Kuhn would probably send him back to Vienna or Mokolov. But instead, he sent him to the family castle in another town. Now, he was welcomed there by Count Kuhn's brother, Count Egon, who was an amateur painter, and Count Egon and Alphonse Mucha spent many hours discussing painting. Now, the Count advised Mucha to go to the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich to get a better education. He had no money. There was no opportunity for him to go there. He did seat himself for the entrance examination, and he was admitted as a third-year student. That's how talented he was. Now, Munich was an exciting city for him, and although the academy that he attended utterly ignored all innovation, his teachers were pretty good at the curriculum. They reinforced traditions. They had an attachment to historical painting, which he was familiar with. So he felt that he got a good education there, and Count Kuhn, of course, was paying the bill for him, and he was prepared to finance further studies since he did such a great job, and offered him a choice of either Paris or Rome to go to school on his dime. So Mucha chooses Paris. And he arrives there in 1887. He didn't speak a word of French when he arrived, but he enrolls at the Académie Julienne, where he studied with a number of French masters, and he devoted hours to painting and then more hours to learning to speak the language. Now, Count Kuhn would send him 200 francs a month to pay for his board and lodging, and also paid for his tuition fees, but he expected regular progress reports and drawings in return. And he was investing in Mucha in hopes that maybe some of his work would become so popular that Count Kuhn would sell his artwork. Now, in the summer, Mucha would meet the Count in Munich, spend the holidays at his home. He would paint more frescoes on the castle walls, and then he would return to Paris, lived in a room on the left bank, and eventually enrolled in another academy called the Académie Colarossi. Now, he was hard at work there when Count Kuhn in 1889 decides to discontinue all financial assistance. He gets a letter stating that with no explanation. Now, it's still not known why Count Kuhn made this decision. Many art historians believe that he felt that maybe Mucha didn't write back often enough, wasn't showing his respect, therefore being ungrateful. Maybe he felt that it was time for Mucha to go off on his own. But it was at this point that it was an abrupt end in finances. In any case, the artist was penniless. So he said, "I was saved from starvation by an order for some illustrations for a short story magazine, and then later by a commission to illustrate an epic poem for a Prague publisher." Now, one of his friends at the Académie Colarossi dragged him away from the hovel that he lived in and introduced him to Madame Charlotte, and she owned a hotel, which was a place where she would let out rooms to a number of starving artists or poets, and it was called Madame Charlotte's Creamery, and it was on the Rue de Grand Chaumier, which was right across from the academy where he was going to school. Madame Charlotte was the widow of an army officer that was killed in 1870 when Paris was besieged by the Prussians, and she ran a restaurant for students, and she treated these students as members of her own family. Now, Mucha was in contact with students from every nationality, so he heard all the gossip that was going on around Europe about available opportunities for work. He produced a number of covers for magazines. He illustrated a book of fairy tales for printer and publisher. He submitted a number of designs to the Salon, which is that great glass-roofed exhibition hall where all the artists wanted to have their work displayed in hopes that someone might buy their work. And he received a number of honorable mentions at the Salon. One of the friends that Alphonse Mucha made at the Creamery, who also lived there, another starving artist, probably one of the least likely people you would think that Alphonse Mucha was friends with, was Paul Gauguin. Someday, I'm going to make that timeline I keep talking about and show how all of these artists' life interweave. It would probably go from here to there, but it's absolutely amazing when I start reading the letters of these artists. And I read a letter by Gauguin talking about his relationship with Mucha, which is how I knew that they had this relationship, started digging up letters on Mucha and realized they actually lived in the same place, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So Gauguin arrives in 1891. Now, meanwhile, he was organizing a sale of his own work to finance his long wished-for trip to the South Pacific. So this was around the time that he was hoping to escape to the exotic islands. He had no money, Gauguin, but Madame Charlotte lent him some money, bought a few of his paintings to keep him going. And Mucha offered him use of his own studio, and the two men worked together, each in their own corner, but they worked and inspired each other and talked about painting and ideas day and night. Now, Mucha bought himself a harmonium, which he eventually learned how to play, and he took a very amusing and very famous photo of Gauguin seated at the harmonium. Have you seen this picture before? It appears in a lot of art history books. Now, photography became kind of a hobby for Mucha, so all of the photographs many of the photographs that are in here are photographs that Mucha did himself. Models cost money, so whenever he employed one, he would photograph her as many times as he could in varied positions, and he would supplement his photographic archives with snapshots of friends and people that he eventually wanted to paint. He continued to work on magazine covers. He designed a calendar for an inks and paints manufacturer, L'Oreal, and he also designed lottery tickets. Best of all, though, he came in regular contact with a gentleman who asked him to become a contributor to the Le Costume au Théâtre magazine, which regularly featured drawings of costumes and set designs and productions. It was kind of an advertising magazine, and they had illustrators put these ideas in this brochure, and they were for theater and operatic opportunities for costume set designs, etc. But Alphonse Mucha felt the best part of illustrating for this magazine was that he received tickets to the various productions around town, which he would later draw for the magazine. Now, Mucha's Art Nouveau period dates from the end of 1894, and the legend, which is created by Mucha himself, although validated in a number of different letters, to kind of qualify that this is a really true story, although it may have been elaborated a little bit over the years. It's set in the offices of Le Messier, which is a well-known printing company in the area where he lived in Paris. And throughout his life, Mucha was a deeply religious man. I forgot to show you the photograph that he made. Incidentally, that's Anna La Javanaise. Did we do Gauguin here yet? Remember he hung around with that woman who had a monkey? That's her. So Mucha was this deeply religious man. He followed no formal doctrine, but he was convinced that there was a supernatural intervention that occurred in daily life. He didn't believe in what he called religious determinism, but he did think that every person had an exclusive destiny that was available to them. Fate would either allow it to be filled or it would sweep them away from it. Those are his words. So his belief in fate convinced him that this divine intervention comes at crucial points throughout your life. And it's evident in a series of events during very important periods in his life where he just gets these opportunities laid before him. Now, here's the legend. Around Christmas time, 1894, Alphonse Mucha's life changed forever. He was alone in the print shop, Le Messier print shop, on Christmas Day, and he was proofing some lithographs. And just as he was completing the work, the print shop manager rushed in and informed him that Sarah Bernhardt had just telephoned to say that she needed a poster ready for New Year's Day for a play that she was doing. And it was for her play, Gismonda. And attendances had been low. She wanted to boost attendance for the beginning of the new year and revive it. So she wanted a poster to advertise this. And she calls the printer to see if anyone was available. Now, it was the holiday period. All of the regular poster artists were away. And Mucha said, I saw an opportunity of a lifetime. And I interjected that I could deliver the poster in 2 weeks. Wasn't sure how he was going to do that, but he was going to deliver the poster. So he rents a tailcoat. He borrows, he said, an ill-fitting hat, and he arrived at the theater with pad and pencil. He said, I found Sarah magnificent and soon worked up a poster design. Now, the print shop manager went off on holiday, leaving Mucha to execute the work on these 2 lithographic stones where the poster would eventually be printed. And on the manager's return, which was December 30th, the poster was printed and hanging to dry. The print shop manager was horrified at what he saw. He was certain that Sarah would reject the poster and felt that his own situation now was at risk, but there was no time left to change it. So the poster was printed, a copy was sent directly to the Renaissance Theater, and Mucha, although very unnerved by the reaction, said that he sank into a depression until he was aroused by a telephone call summoning him to the theater. Feeling like a condemned man on his way to the scaffold, he said, he went to find Sarah entranced with her image on the poster, and this was the poster. She loved the work. She welcomed Mucha and tied him into a contract, not only for him to design her posters, theater cards, programs, but also all of her costumes and set designs. Talk about divine intervention. Mucha's poster of Sarah Bernhardt as Gismonda announced to the world his new style and his jaw-dropping talent. Now, I'm going to step aside a little and tell you about the little scuttlebutt that's going on about this. There is this ever-increasing controversy, and I don't know who starts these rumors, but about this poster. Ever since the dawn of the 20th century, there was a universal consensus based on these letters and documents and things that were written in the papers that Alphonse Mucha launched his sensational career, which eventually became known as Art Nouveau, with this poster. This event was associated with the appearance of the Gismonda poster promoting Sarah Bernhardt's play. And at an estate sale in 1954, a small sketch bearing a likeness to Alphonse Mucha's poster was at this sale. Now, according to people who believe this to be true, they used a digital computer image enhancement to apply to the design, and image analysis of the original initials on the original sketch or poster design revealed the famous letters P space G-O, Paul Gauguin. That's how he used to sign his work. It was a monogram signature for Paul Gauguin when he would sketch. Historians have concluded, after much research, that as early as 1890, that it was Gauguin rather than Mucha who created the original Gismonda composition. Art historians disagree, mainly because Paul Gauguin wasn't that talented. And the work that he did from that point on, I mean, he had a very unique, flat kind of a look, but this is so stylized. Nothing was ever represented in Paul Gauguin's work that was as stylized as this. And yet, if you notice, the work previous to this, from when Mucha was young, always had that kind of a neoclassical refinement that Paul Gauguin's work. So historians are perpetuating this story, and it comes out every once in a while, kind of like Halloween stories, I think. And art historians say, oh, that's a bunch of bunk. So historical events supposedly suggest that, and this is true, that while Gauguin was in Brittany recovering from injuries that he sustained from yet another fist fight, his former model and lover, this young 16-year-old Anna la Javanaise, the woman with the monkey, stole all of his possessions, took them to Paris, where her next lover, Alphonse Mucha, copied the sketch and presented them as the original poster design. Now, we know that Anna la Javanaise went from Paul Gauguin to Alphonse Mucha, and she did loot his house and steal everything. Well, he was kind of beating her up daily, so she felt that maybe she owed that to him. He was a rough character, and she was 16 and pretty smart at the time. So at any rate, let's go back to the story. Now you know the truth. So at any rate, Sarah recognized this gold mine when she saw it of the posters, and Mucha's poster for Gismonda was unveiled to the public January 1st, 1895. His new colors were muted and translucent. This was nothing anybody had ever seen up to this point. The effect was electric. The elongated, slender form of Sarah in her long dress, standing kind of posed as a decoration. Not masses of color, but these intricate linear patterns. And his poster was always placed just above ground level, forcing the passerby to stop, to come close, and to look at all the detail. Now, crowds would gather around each poster, and collectors would bribe the poster men to keep one for them in an attempt to steal them. Before the glue would dry, they would peel them off the walls. They would cut them off the boarding so that they can get some of these posters. They were very, very popular. Now, Sarah Bernhardt knew this, that she was kind of the original rock idol doing posters of her show. And she ordered 4,000 copies of the poster, knowing that she was going to make a fortune on these. And she asked the printer to deliver them in small batches, which she sold at a considerable profit to all of her fans. Unfortunately, the printer only delivered 3,450 posters. He undoubtedly sold the balance for himself. This led to a court case in 1897. Don't you love this? When Sarah asked for 5,000 francs in damages. Now, she refused to disclose to the court how much she was selling the posters for, and therefore her loss could not be assessed, and she was only awarded 500 francs. She did win the lawsuit. After that, she refused to print any more posters with Le Messier, and she always wanted to maintain a limited edition. She would have the lithographic stones destroyed, and as a result, she transferred all of her custom work to another printer because of this scandal. And Mucha, being her artist in resident, and he was paid a kind of a retainer fee, followed her. Now, nothing Mucha had done before this poster gave any indication that he was experimenting with this detailed, soft colors, the stylized kind of art, but now it was starting to become his signature style. His work before the posters was academic at best. They were composed to real-life perspective, very meticulous in their historical research, but they weren't stylized to look like advertising art. So, faced with designing this original poster, he showed that he absorbed and retained all the lessons that he learned from his contemporaries and the art of other countries and other eras, and he was capable of transforming his talent into these paintings, into his own vocabulary of image and layout. Now, this doesn't look new to us. It looks like something we may have seen. But at the time, this was revolutionary, this simple, flat kind of outline design. He emphasized the slender, elongated form of Sarah Bernhardt. He always used tall, narrow poster designs. He said her short, frizzy hair always defeated me, but instead I would surround her head with flowers like a celestial crown and then transform her hair into an abstract design. He devised the perfect image. Now, he was not to depart from this formula in the major posters that he executed for Sarah Bernhardt or anyone else, for that matter, for several years. Now, after this influential work in Mucha's career, his popularity was very difficult to ignore. Even in the midst of many of the great artists, he managed to create a brand and captivate Paris, as well as the rest of France, with these beautiful, intricate, simplistic designs. And his name could be found on every wall and in town. His name was heard coming from everyone's lips. Everyone wanted Mucha to produce posters for them in those pre-Hollywood days. He was kind of considered like an art superstar, the likes of which were rarely seen in the art world up to this point. Some of his more famous works were produced as decorative lithographic panels, including Four Seasons, where he won awards for this combination of graphics, and one of the paintings called Four Precious Stones was hailed as some of his best work. Now, as time went on, he became extremely famous, and his social life was exceedingly active, but that did not slow down his productivity. He produced posters for liqueurs such as Benedictine, for cigarette papers, for Nestle's. As a matter of fact, when Nestle's comes out with their 100th anniversary or their anniversary tins, they always have Mucha's design still on them to this day. The Moet and Chandon champagne bottles, biscuit containers. He did a lot of work. You probably recognize the Moet and Chandon label there in the center, and those are Nestle reproductions. So, as an important part of the creed for this new movement, which is now called the decorative movement, the graphics that Mucha created for the Art Nouveau genre, the decorative movement stated that they wanted to have art created for the masses that should serve to adorn and beautify goods of common consumption and utility, meaning they wanted their art on your shelves, on your tables, in everyday life so that we could all enjoy it. And Mucha created a series of decorative panels allowing them to be mass-produced as works of art that could be afforded by the everyday person. He's one of the first artists that created prints that you could actually afford to buy. His designs have been used over and over again for a variety of products around the world. And you can see them even now in our own time. I look in a catalog and I see the Mucha prints on a number of different things. And his style became known as Art Nouveau, French for new art. Now, I want to clarify a little bit about this ambiguous term. First of all, Mucha never associated himself with Art Nouveau. He would resent the fact that he was identified in any particular style, genre. He disliked the name movement because he argued that art was eternal and therefore could never be nouveau. He always insisted on and followed his own sense of the important spiritual purpose of art. Those are his words. And he derived his main inspiration from the Czech traditions and the artwork that he grew up on. So he ascribed to the doctrines of the old, not necessarily the new. So even though many others associated his work with Art Nouveau, sometimes they called it le style Mucha, it was something that he would never have admitted to. Second, you have to be careful when you use the term Art Nouveau not to over-determine what it means. The term is very useful in a way of describing a spirit of reform or rebellion, maybe freedom that started to sweep through the art world at the end of the 19th century, originating, as all artistic changes do, in a strong reaction to the prevailing style of conventional art. So it was something that was an awakening. Especially the art that was being practiced in the schools and promoted in the salons. This was kind of a new revolt. The original independent artists were creating a revolt against art. This was kind of a new revolt against art and architecture. But Art Nouveau had this desire to get rid of the distinctions between high and low art. So fine art and everyday art. And for many of the artists, the essential thing was to unify the lives of people through art. Not just an expensive painting on a rich person's wall or an institution or a salon, but the essential objects of everyday life in their home furnishings, in their cups and saucers, on the advertisements, wall hangings, everything from door handles to lampposts to sewer grates, toilet seats. Everything had this new kind of a style where you can tie it all together. We're familiar with that now, but again, this was a kind of a new idea to bring art into the everyday life. Even purely functional objects that were machine-made and mass-produced were now shaped by this new decorative power of art. So we see many Art Nouveau artists, Mucha in particular, demonstrating a wide range of artistic interests in jewelry and in servingware, furniture, etc. Now, in addition to being a brilliant painter and illustrator, he was also a master of design. And the sketches that he did for things like jewelry and furniture and other things emphasized uniting beauty and utility. And that was at the heart of this whole new social message known as Art Nouveau. I gave you a little history lesson there. It was inspired kind of in part by the strong reaction against the ugliness of the manufactured material, which was increasingly dominating people's lives and making the idea of an artisan craftsman kind of obsolete. So the artists had to infuse their work into this mass-produced element. The emphasis on ornamentation and linear patterning was not just decorative. For many of the Art Nouveau artists, the essence was style, the symbolic content of the pattern, which kind of emerged as a visual metaphor. And Mucha always said that his graphic designs were charged with spiritual energy and meaning. Now, as he felt freer to approach this decorative idea, he experimented with a lot of the serpentine possibilities of hair during this time. He gave his maidens and his graphics the most elaborately involved, intertwined tendrils of hair, which descended and curled up, which was admired by a lot of people. Some people called it a macaroni style or noodle style. But not a lot of people liked it, but he was able to simplify hair into this graphic design. So when people tell me, gosh, I don't know who Alphonse Mucha is, I always say the beautiful women with the hair, and they know exactly who I'm talking about. Okay, so now Alphonse Mucha marries Marushka on June 10th, 1906 in Prague. And around this time, they decided to visit the U.S. And they were in the U.S. from 1906 to 1910. And the reasons for going there was simple: money. He was now determined to establish a new reputation as a serious painter and a portraitist. He had made it as a graphic designer. He already did what he was doing in Europe, and now he wanted to come to the U.S. and be recognized as a fine arts painter. Incidentally, their daughter, Jaroslava, was born in New York City. They also had a son that they brought with them. He was born in Prague, and he later became, their son Yuri, later became a very well-known journalist, writer, screenwriter. He wrote autobiographical novels. He also studied the work of his father. So this American tour began in the spring of 1904 with kind of a hero's welcome in New York. It was in the newspapers. He was announced as the world's greatest decorative artist. And the catch was they were advertising him as a decorative artist. So anybody who was having a fashionable soiree, they wanted to have posters done by the very famous Alphonse Mucha. Now, New York welcomed him enthusiastically. They put 2 full pages in the New York Times, and he had countless social invitations welcoming his arrival. But what the Americans demanded from Alphonse Mucha was not this fine art that he was hoping to bring to the U.S., but the type of work that he was now ready to abandon. So this dissolved into a disaster. The new and wealthy American friends knew that Alphonse Mucha was not willing to do this work for them. They also knew that he was poor, impoverished, and he was coming to the U.S. to make money, and so they kind of forced him to do the kind of work that he didn't want to do, and he refused. He declined opportunities to undertake any kind of decorative project. So he wouldn't even accept commissions for this decorative project, but he would accept commissions for society portraiture. This was not his forte, but this was the new style that he wanted to develop. He was unaccustomed to American business practices. He was not very well advised when he came here. And for the first time in his life, his work remained unsold. His clients and the unreliability of how he was being represented was something that was a big disappointment to him. So now he had to find a way to make money. So his main source of income came from teaching. And he went to New York and Chicago and taught at a couple different universities. Now his dash for gold, which he called it, extended over 4 years in America, and he considers them to be his lost years, where the artistic taste started to move further and further away from what he wanted to bring to the U.S. He wanted to bring fine art, memories of his homeland, the reality of the times of what was going on in Europe. He wanted to bring it over to the U.S., but he needed to earn some money to fund these projects and to do this kind of work that he wanted to do. And he wanted also to demonstrate to the Czechs that he had left behind that he had not sold out to the Americans who were demanding this kind of work from him. In the end, fortune's favor appeared in person. A man by the name of Charles Crane, who was an American millionaire, was intensely interested in foreign affairs and Slavic culture, coincidentally. And Crane agreed to finance one of the projects that Alphonse Mucha wanted to work on, called the Slav Epic. And he was going to provide financial and emotional sustenance to Alphonse Mucha for a short period of time, but it turned out to be 20 years. Mucha returns to Prague, and he took up a mission which turned out to be the capstone of his life. To make a little bit of money just to get started on this project, he did decorate the mayor's office at the municipal house and a couple other landmarks, and this is some of the work that he did. But when Czechoslovakia won its independence after World War I, he designed new postage stamps, banknotes, other government documents for the new state. And this didn't satisfy him. He still wanted to work in the fine arts. He felt that he was wasting his time on these frivolous projects. Most of the money that he got from Crane was squandered. It was given away as fast as he had earned it. The new century was approaching. There was a universal exhibition in Paris, and it housed a major retrospective of the work that Alphonse Mucha was working on. And during this time, there was some talk about designing an exhibition hall where he could execute a number of drawings and paintings. And it was meant to be at the base of the Eiffel Tower. The project was never executed. Now, what sets Alphonse Mucha apart from the other artists of the Art Nouveau movement was that he was feeling increasingly dominated by his personal life. He didn't want to adhere to the rules of Art Nouveau, and he makes this extreme commitment to the Slavic culture and decides that this is the kind of work that he's going to do. He's not going to prescribe to any of the ideals of Art Nouveau. He was done making the commissions, designing furniture, doing all the commercial aspects, and he was deeply convicted, no doubt on the basis of his early experience when he was growing up, that he should develop his style out of old ethnic and national traditions. And he was committed, in his words, to commit himself to art for his Slav heritage. And the decision was accompanied by this sense of disillusionment of the style that really made him famous. So he returns to Paris, and although this experience didn't lead him to make an immediate change in his style, he did spend the rest of his life with Czech art, particularly because in his eyes, It was being dangerously corrupted, in his words, by foreign, especially German influence. So he hurled all of his energies into advancing the cause of art in his own country. In 1910, he began a project that he proposed with Charles Crane, the Slav Epic, and he spent many years working on what he considered to be his fine art masterpieces. It's a series of 20 huge paintings depicting the history of the Czech and Slavic people, and he dreamt of completing this series as a celebration of Slavic history ever since he was young, and now he was finally doing it. These are some of the panels that are in this magnificent work of art. He was always a patriot of the Czech homeland. He considered his success to be a triumph for the Czech people as much as for himself. This is an idea just to see the size of these canvases. There were 20 massive canvases, about 24 feet by 30 feet. They were created and presented to the city of Prague in 1928. And they covered the history of Slavic people from prehistory into the 19th century, and they represented Mucha's hopes and dreams for his homeland. In 1919, the first 11 canvases were completed and exhibited in Prague, and America actually was a little excited about what he was doing. Unfortunately, history has not been kind to either Mucha or the Czechs, and as the current unrest in the area of the turn of the century shows, the bequest that he gave to his country was received with kind of cold shoulders. The geopolitical world of 10 years after World War I was very different from the one that Mucha lived in when he began this project. Moravia was now part of the new nation Czechoslovakia. The art world was changing as well. Varying political groups brought out their personal arsenals of the cruel prejudice, which was damning aspects of Alphonse Mucha's work. And the public seemed to appreciate the paintings, but the political agendas doesn't really give a lot of weight to public opinion, so they were still criticizing his old-fashioned ideas. Now, the rising tide of fascism in the late 1930s led to Mucha's works on the Slav nationalism as being denounced by the press, as being reactionary. And when the Nazis occupied Czechoslovakia and divided the country up into Bohemia and Moravia and Slovakia in 1939, Mucha was one of the first people that was arrested by the Gestapo. During the course of the interrogation, he started getting sick and fell ill to pneumonia. And though he was eventually released, he never recovered from the strain of this event or seeing his homeland invaded and overcome, and criticism of his work. And he eventually dies in Prague on July 14th, 1939, of a lung infection just before his 79th birthday. Now, in 1939, his countrymen gave him a hero's funeral as a great Czech in a public ceremony where most of the important creative artists among the Czech people were buried. His tribute was kind of a historical moment, more of a historical moment than a tribute to his popularity or the national significance of his art. It was, the funeral of Alphonse Mucha was an assertion of Czech identity in the early months of this brutal Nazi occupation. And a moment, the funeral was kind of a moment of popular passive resistance, an act of defiance against the occupying authorities who had banned all public demonstration. So they used it as a political event. Once the historical situation changed, the works of Alphonse Mucha was shoved aside. No government officials after World War II even bothered to find a suitable place to house this massive gift to the nation. It remained rolled up in storage for more than 35 years before being put on permanent display in a castle near Brno, where it's barely seen by the public. Within a few years of leaving Paris, Mucha was completely forgotten by the art world. Now, it's been documented that a major gallery in Paris bought huge quantities of these decorative panels that were rolled up and stored away, and they folded them in half cut a window opening on one side, and they used them as mounts or mats to display other well-known works of art in museum. They said the panels were cheaper than plain white card. Now, when a revival of the interest of Art Nouveau began during the post-war years, none of the writers on the subject even mentioned Alphonse Mucha. In my history books, I have no word of Alphonse Mucha at all in 6 years I went to school. By the time of his death, his style was considered outdated. But his son, Yuri, devoted much of his life to writing about him, bringing attention to his art, and interest in Alphonse Mucha's style, distinctive style, experienced a strong revival in the 1960s when there was this general interest in Art Nouveau. In his own country, there's not much interest in Mucha. There's a small Mucha museum that appears in Prague run by his grandson. You have to make an appointment to go in there and see the work, and much of the work is prints. He was, however, one of the most important decorative artists working in Paris at the turn of the century, and his distinctive and original posters and his decorative panels, which are now called Le Style Mucha, became almost synonymous with French Art Nouveau. He was an illustrator who gave an astonishing mood to his works, but most important, he was dedicated to bringing art into the lives of everyday people, and he succeeded at that. And that's the story of Alphonse Mucha. Any questions? Yes?
Well, you know, it's interesting that he has painted or created all these images of these beautiful women with this hair. And the woman that he chose to marry is almost peasant-like looking. She's very plain, very, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
It's just an interesting.
Well, you know, they didn't have that hair. He just gave them that hair as an artistic. Yeah,
Exactly.
Have they done much as far as restoring those pianos, or they?
You know, Yuri worked very hard. John Mucha, the grandson, is working hard to get money to support that. But there doesn't seem to be any support with the nation that, you know, brought him to life to do that. But they take donations. Every once in a while, there's a little article in the newspaper about the Prague Museum and what Yuri has done. But he's kind of gone unnoticed. Yes?
The large panels that he painted in Prague, I mean,
The Epic, Slav Epic.
did he do them all by himself?
Yes. No, he had no assistance. He did all of the panels himself. He would build his scaffolding, put it up, make his, you know.
How long did it take, do you know?
Well, it took him almost 20 years to do all of those panels, 18 and a half. There's some dispute about how long it really took him, but the first 11 images took him 10 years to do, the first 11 images.
Are people collecting his works now like they do other artists, or is he still kind of?
You don't see him in any museums. A lot of his work was destroyed. No, it's unfortunate. I don't think Nazis, there was some thought that maybe that collection that was found had some Mucha works in it, but they weren't, they were copies. Yes?
Did you come across any evidence that he had any exposure to Frank Lloyd Wright when he was here in Chicago or New York? Just because they had similar, you know, decorative arts and integrating the furniture and the art. I thought it was just interesting.
I have to look into that.
And I have to look into Frank Lloyd Wright's exposure to him, because he went to Europe, and you know, the Vosma collection is what really exposed Europeans, and that was in the early 1900s. But it was, I didn't know Mucha came to the States. That's interesting. Yeah. That's very interesting.
Yes.
In the Chicago World's Fair, there's a bit of Art Nouveau in some of the, they're the major, buildings. Pardon me then?
The industrial buildings?
No, not the industrial building, but in some of the individual countries that had exhibits, like large panels and so forth. Is that just a follower then of Mucha, or was Mucha represented in the Chicago World's Fair?
That's a good question. I'm going to have to look into that. I don't know. You always stump me. I don't know. As soon as he raises his hand, I know I'm not going to know the answer to that. No, you just have so much more exposure than I do. I'm a little embarrassed, but no, I don't know. But I will look into it, though. I will. That'll be one of my things, yes.
This all reminds me of another artist, Maxwell. Can anybody? Does it? Am I?
Well, I think many of the artists of the Art Nouveau movement had that simplified design. So many of the artists are going to be, similar.
To me, they're very. I mean, they're so
ornate,
busy. Yeah, they're beautiful.
Well, thank you so much. Our next lecture is Norman Rockwell, I think.
Monday, November 9th at 7 p.m. It's going to be at Norman Rockwell.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you the real story of Norman Rockwell.
Thanks to the management and staff of the Hudson Library and Historical Society for their assistance in the production of this program and for providing the Through the Eyes of the Artist series for the citizens of Hudson. For a DVD or Blu-ray copy of this or any HCTV program, contact Hudson Cable Television at 330-653-2500 or via email at hctv@hudson.oh.us.